Blood trickled down Devon Carter's face as 3 police officers pointed their weapons at him in his own living room. On the ground. "Now," they shouted. His mother screamed. 12 hours earlier, Devon had saved a man's life. Now he might lose his own. Before I continue this incredible story of courage and injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see how this young hero survives the terrifying moment when those meant to protect him become his biggest threat. The day had started like any other for 14-year-old Devon Carter in Oakwood Heights, a struggling neighborhood on Baltimore's east side where hope felt as rare as opportunity. He lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with his mother, Letitia, and 9-year-old sister, Zoe. Zoe's severe asthma required medication they could barely afford. Letitia worked 3 jobs just to keep them afloat, cleaning downtown offices from 5 to 9 a.m., serving lunch at the local elementary school, and answering phones at a neighborhood clinic 3 evenings a week. Devon had seen her grow more tired with every passing month, the weight of their struggles drawing permanent worry lines across her once bright face. 6 months ago, without telling her, Devon had lied about his age and gotten a job delivering newspapers. He woke every morning at 4 a.m., 30 minutes before his alarm buzzed, careful not to disturb his mother, who had likely only just gone to bed. But this morning, something felt off. A heavy stillness hung in the air, thick as the fog pressing against his window. The apartment was freezing again. Mr. Brennan, their landlord, had ignored Letitia's repeated calls about the broken heater for weeks. Devon slipped out from under the thin blankets he shared with Zoe, whose wheezing breaths were louder than usual. The cold was always hardest on her. He layered up 3 shirts and a second-hand jacket, too tight across the shoulders, but better than nothing. In the kitchen, he made peanut butter on stale bread, setting aside some for his mom and sister. He scribbled a quick note for Zoe to remember her inhaler and quietly slipped out, locking the door behind him and returning their only key through the mail slot. Devon dreamed of becoming a doctor. One day, ever since the kind physician who had once saved Zoe's life explained everything to them with respect instead of pity. He kept library-borrowed medical books under his bed, studying them late at night after homework. His best friend Marcus, from the apartment below, shared the same dream. They even calculated how much money they'd need to save every month to afford college. But this morning, Devon was alone, his heavy newspaper bag across his chest, the fog making even familiar streets feel unfamiliar. He nearly collided with a parked car and decided to take a shortcut through Westlake Estates, a gated community that bordered their neighborhood but felt like another world. Normally, he avoided it. Wealthy white residents didn't welcome kids like him, but he couldn't afford another tardy at school. As Devon approached the gate, the security guard, a middle-aged man with a permanent scowl, stepped out of his booth. "Where do you think you're going?" the guard barked, hand near his taser. Devon kept his hands visible, voice steady. He explained about his paper route and the fog. After calling his supervisor, the guard let him through grudgingly. "Stay on the main road. Don't even think about going near any houses." Devon nodded and moved on, the guard suspicious, eyes burning into his back. Nearly at the other end of the community, something caught Devon's eye through the fog, a shape that didn't belong. A car, tilted at a strange angle, had gone off the road and down a steep embankment. It was a black Bentley, crumpled and wedged against some trees. Devon scrambled down the slick slope, heart pounding. Inside, slumped over the airbag, was a man, bleeding from a head wound, and dressed in a blood-stained designer suit. Devon opened the passenger door. The car reeked of gasoline. The man wasn't moving, but he was breathing barely. Every emergency protocol he had read flashed through Devon's mind. He knew moving an injured person could be dangerous, especially if there were spinal injuries. But the smell of gasoline grew stronger, and then he saw it, a flicker of flame. There was no time with strength born of desperation. Devon unbuckled. The man began dragging him out, careful to keep the man's head and neck aligned. His arms trembled. Sweat mixed with tears as he pulled the man up the hill. The Bentley exploded just as they reached the top, blasting heat and fire into the sky. Devon fell backward, dazed, but alive. He spotted a smartphone that had fallen from the man's pocket and dialed 911. His voice was breathless, but clear. The dispatcher instructed him to stay with the man and monitor his breathing. Devon removed his own jacket and placed it gently beneath the man's head. He watched the flames consume the car, the fog swirling with smoke. 15 minutes later, sirens howled as emergency vehicles pulled up. But the moment the paramedics saw Devon Young Black, covered in blood and soot, their faces changed. "What happened here?" one asked, more suspicious than concerned. Devon explained everything calmly, clearly. But they looked at him like a threat, not a rescuer. Only when another explosion rocked the area did they shift focus to the injured man. Devon asked if he could ride to the hospital with him. He shouldn't wake up alone, he said quietly. He remembered how his own father had died in a hospital room, with no family beside him. Reluctantly, they agreed. At Baltimore Memorial, the reception was even colder. Staff kept security nearby. Devon overheard whispers. The man he'd saved was Richard Whitfield, billionaire founder of Whitfield Technologies, one of the richest men in the state. No one thanked Devon. No one believed him. After waiting 2 hours, ignored and watched, Devon realized he was late for school and had nothing to show for his heroism but ruined clothes, a missed paper route, and the knowledge he had done the right thing. He walked back across Baltimore. He arrived at Franklin Douglas High just as third period ended, clothes torn and stained, his jacket gone, his face streaked with dried blood and grime. The school's secretary, Mrs. Wellington, looked up over her rhinestone glasses with a mix of concern and disapproval. "This is your third late arrival this month, Mr. Carter," she said slowly, writing the tardy slip. Devon tried to explain about the crash, the rescue, the fire, the hospital, but Mrs. Wellington gave a tired sigh. "Save the Hollywood screenplay for creative writing class," she cut him off mid-sentence, sliding the pink detention slip across the counter. "Principal Farnsworth will need to speak with your mother if this keeps happening." The rest of the school day passed in a haze of exhaustion and hunger. Devon hadn't eaten since yesterday, his skipped breakfast and the physical toll of the rescue leaving him dizzy, unable to concentrate on algebra problems or historical dates. His torn, stained clothes drew whispers and side glances in the halls. But no one, not even his teachers, offered help or concern. Only Marcus bothered to ask what happened. Even Miss Patterson, his favorite teacher, seemed to assume he'd been in trouble. Her usual warm smile was gone, replaced with a disapproving frown and a reminder about making better choices. By the final bell, Devon had almost convinced himself the entire morning had been a surreal dream, that he hadn't pulled a billionaire from a burning car, hadn't watched first responders treat him like a threat, hadn't seen suspicion cloud every interaction. But reality slammed back into him. When he arrived at the newspaper distribution center, Mr. Kelly, his route supervisor, was waiting, arms crossed, face red with fury. "You abandoned your route," he shouted before Devon could speak. "Left papers scattered across one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. Do you have any idea how many complaints I've had?" Devon tried to explain the crash, the rescue, the hospital, but Mr. Kelly wasn't interested. "Save the story for someone who believes it," he snapped. "You're fired. Final check will be mailed. Don't bother coming back." The words hit like a punch. Without that job, Devon could no longer contribute to the secret fund he kept for Zoe's medication. The 5-mile walk home felt longer than ever, every step weighed down by anxiety, calculations spinning in his head. How would they make rent? How would they survive the winter? When he finally reached their apartment building, Even its sagging form felt hostile. The cracked steps and flaking paint weren't signs of home today. They were signs of collapse. Then he saw it, taped to their apartment door. Eviction unnoted, 3 months behind on rent. 72 hours to pay or vacate. Devin sank onto the top step, overwhelmed. He had saved a man's life, one of the richest men in Maryland, and lost everything in return. He stayed there until sunset, trying to gather the strength to tell his mother. Only when Mrs. Jackson from apartment 3 came up the stairs with grocery bags did he stir. "You see the news about that rich guy's crash this morning?" she asked, catching her breath. "They say some good Samaritan pulled him out before the car exploded. Not naming him though. Probably some rich white man, can't risk tarnishing the story." Devin said nothing. He helped her carry her bags and went inside. Letitia sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of unpaid bills, looking more exhausted than ever. That night, once Zoe was asleep, Devin told her everything: the accident, the rescue, the hospital, getting fired. Letitia's eyes filled with a storm of emotions. When he finished, she pulled him into a tight embrace. "You did a brave thing," she whispered into his hair. "I raised you right." But later that night, Devin overheard her talking to Mrs. Jackson through their thin shared wall. "Getting mixed up in rich white folks' problems never ends well for people like us," Mrs. Jackson warned. "That boy of yours better watch his back now." Her words proved prophetic. Just after 11 p.m., a sharp knock rattled their apartment door. Devin emerged from his bedroom as Letitia looked through the peephole, her body tensing. She opened the door slowly. 3 police officers stood in the hallway, hands near their weapons, expressions cold and unreadable. "Devin Carter?" asked the lead officer, a tall white man with close-cropped hair and icy blue eyes. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened this morning with Richard Whitfield." Before Devin could reply, they stepped past Letitia and into the living room. "Mr. Whitfield's watch is missing," said the officer. "His name badge, Red Simmons. A custom Patek Philippe, worth $75,000. Last seen on his wrist before the accident." The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke, infecting the room. "I didn't take anything," Devin said, his voice barely audible. "I was just trying to help him." Simmons exchanged looks with the others. "We have a warrant to search the premises." He handed Letitia a document, another blow in a day already full of them. Her hands shook as she read it. "You can't do this," she cried. "He's a child. He saved that man's life." But they ignored her. With practiced detachment, the officers began tearing through the apartment, dumping drawers, tossing cushions, pulling open cabinets and closets. Their home, already modest, was reduced to wreckage. Devin stood, frozen, in the middle of it all, helpless, as Zoe sobbed quietly behind Letitia. They found nothing, of course, but the damage was done. The humiliation, the fear, it lingered in every overturned cushion and scattered belonging. "Do you think Devin should have left Richard Whitfield in that burning car instead of getting involved?" Comment number 1: if you believe helping others is always worth the risk, even in a world stacked against you. Comment number 2: if you believe self-preservation should come first, especially when the system assumes the worst. Like this video if you've ever been judged unfairly, and subscribe to see what happens next in Devon's fight for justice. The police found no evidence, but that didn't stop Officer Simmons from insisting they continue the conversation downtown. His tone left no room for debate. When Letitia demanded to go with her son, Simmons shook his head. "We just need to get his statement. He'll be back in a couple of hours." The fear in her eyes as Devin was led to the squad car would haunt him forever. In the back seat, pressed between 2 officers, with the child-proof locks engaged, Devin sat in silence. 14 years old, an honor student, now treated like a criminal. The Baltimore Central Police Station rose before them like a gray fortress, emphasizing, unwelcoming, built for control. not compassion. They led him through secured doors to a barren room, 3 chairs, a metal table, bolted to the floor, a mirrored panel he knew was a 2-way window. Officer Simmons sat across from him. Another officer, a tall black man named Barnes, stood silently by the door. "Let's go over this again," Simmons began, voice calm but edged with steel. "You say you found Whitfield's car, pulled him out, called 911, and rode with him to the hospital. That right?" "Yes, sir," Devon said, remembering to speak clearly, his mother's voice echoing in his head. Simmons leaned forward, fingers interlaced, and during all that heroism, you never noticed the extremely valuable watch on his wrist. Never thought about what that money could do for your family. The accusation hit hard. The distrust in his tone made Devon question himself for a split second. Had he noticed the watch? Coveted it? No, sir, he said, steadying his voice. I was focused on getting him out before the car exploded. Simmons gave a humorless smile. How convenient. Very noble. Then his voice shifted, darkening. But come on. We both know how this works. Kid from the projects stumbles onto a passed-out billionaire. That kind of temptation, one quick decision, one slip of the wrist. He shrugged. It happens. But it'd be a whole lot easier on you if you told us where you hid it. The interrogation dragged on. Simmons shifted between fake sympathy, veiled threats, and cold accusations. He painted Devon as a statistic, another desperate black boy who saw a moment of opportunity and took it. Officer Barnes said nothing, but Devon saw something flicker across his face when Simmons sneered, "You'll end up just like your daddy, another name in the system." That was too far. Devon's father had died from an untreated injury, dismissed by doctors because he didn't have insurance. Devon remembered waiting for him at a police station just like this, just 10 years old, and now, here he was, in the same place, different face, same story. James Carter had been held for 48 hours, without charge or apology. When he finally came home, his face was bruised and his spirit shattered. 6 months later, he died in untreated workplace injury had turned septic and spread to his heart. Devon had never forgotten. Now sitting in that cold interrogation room, he felt the same helpless fury, the same knowledge. The truth doesn't always matter when the system is designed to see you as a threat. The tone shifted when Officer Simmons left the room, and Officer Barnes finally moved from his post by the door to sit across from Devon. "Look, kid," he said softly, his voice stripped of the cold authority the others wielded. "I know what it's like in Oakwood Heights. I grew up not far from there." His tone was less accusatory, more familiar, an attempt at connection. "If you did take the watch," Barnes continued, "if you saw a chance to help your family, I get it. I really do. But if you don't, come clean now. This could end badly. For you, it was the cruelest manipulation, yet pretending to understand." "I didn't take anything," Devon said, staring him straight in the eye. "I just helped someone who needed it. That's all. I would never steal." Something shifted in Barnes' expression. Maybe, just maybe, he believed him. But before he could respond, the door opened. A middle-aged Asian woman in a sharp pantsuit stepped inside. Her voice cut clean through the tension. "I'm Julia Chin, Public Defender's Office," she said. "This interview is over." Her presence changed everything. The room suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous for those who had violated protocol. "My client is a minor, being interrogated without parental consent or legal counsel. That's a blatant violation." Simmons returned behind her, opening his mouth to object, but Chin didn't let him. "I've reviewed hospital surveillance footage. It clearly shows Devon Carter leaving with empty hands. No watch, no bulging pockets. The timeline makes it impossible for him to have taken Mr. Whitfield's property." The silence in the room was deafening. Officer Barnes sat up straighter. Simmons' jaw tightened. That footage was available before you dragged a 14-year-old out of his home in the middle of the night. Chin snapped. This department has exposed itself to serious liability. What followed was a slow churn of bureaucracy. Papers signed, statements filed, but no apologies. Devon's official release. As they left, Simmons leaned in, voice low and cold. "We're watching you, Carter. Everyone slips up eventually." Outside, Julia Chin arranged a ride back to Oakwood Heights. As they waited for the car, she turned to Devon. "What happened tonight was wrong," she said, "but it happens all the time. Be careful." When Devon finally returned home, well past 2 a.m., he found his mother sitting on their tattered couch. Still awake, still waiting. Behind her, the apartment looked like it had been hit by a storm. Drawers overturned, clothes scattered. Even Zoe's asthma medication spilled across the bathroom floor. The real damage wasn't just physical, it was the feeling that their home was no longer safe. As Devon and Letitia began cleaning up the wreckage, he couldn't stop wondering, did Richard Whitfield have any idea what his rescue had cost? Did he care? The answer didn't come, but the consequences did. The next morning, the local news ran a brief segment. Richard Whitfield's luxury watch had gone missing after his car accident. A person of interest was being questioned. They didn't name Devon, but everyone at Franklin Douglas High could put the pieces together. When Devon arrived at school running on barely 3 hours of sleep, Principal Farnsworth summoned him before first period. She sat stiffly behind her desk, hands clasped under her chin. "Mr. Carter," she began, "our school has a reputation to uphold. While you haven't been charged with anything, your connection to an ongoing investigation creates a ... distraction." Devon stared, stunned. She continued, "I suggest you take a voluntary leave of absence. 1 week, just until things settle down." It was a suspension in all but name. When he protested, saying he had done nothing wrong, she cut him off. "This isn't about race, Mr. Carter. This is about maintaining a stable learning environment. I'm trying to help you by keeping this unofficial." Devon saw the truth behind her smile. He nodded quietly and left. By lunch, the story had mutated. The boy who once volunteered at the library had become the thief who robbed a billionaire. Friends avoided him in the halls. Texts went unanswered. His social media shrank overnight. Parents warned their kids to stay away from that Carter boy. Only Marcus stayed by his side. "People are sheep," Marcus muttered as they sat at an empty lunch table. "They'd rather believe you're guilty than admit the cops are hunting the wrong person." The suspicion followed Devon off campus. The local store owner, who used to greet him by name, now followed him down the aisles. The librarian who ordered him special medical books now claimed he was over his borrowing limit. Even the clinic where Letitia worked wasn't spared. Patients asked for someone else, whispering about that woman with the criminal son. But the worst moment came when Zoe returned home crying. Her backpack was covered in marker drawings, prison bars, handcuffs. "They said, 'My brother's a thief,'" she sobbed. "They said you're going to jail and will have to live on the street." Letitia hugged her tightly. Over her shoulder, her eyes met Devon's rage, heartbreak, and helplessness blending into one look. That evening, Devon climbed to the building's rooftop, desperate for air. The city lights glittered far below, but they felt fake like stars in a painted sky. He asked himself the same question over and over. Was it worth it? Was doing the right thing still the right thing when the world punished you for it? Mrs. Jackson, their elderly neighbor, joined him quietly. "Your mama told me everything," she said, lowering herself beside him. Her joints crackled with the effort, but her eyes were sharp. "I just want you to know not everyone believes what they're saying." She reached into her cardigan and handed him a small envelope. "It's only $20 from my Social Security, but it might help with your sister's medicine. Since you lost that job, Devon tried to refuse. She pressed it into his hands. When I was your age in Birmingham, she said, I saw a white man collapse on the street, heart attack. But nobody helped him, not because we didn't want to, but because we weren't allowed to touch white folks. Her voice grew softer. I still wonder if he died, if we all let fear win. She patted Devon's hand. You did what was right, boy. Don't let them make you regret that. Her words warmed a piece of him, but reality stayed cold. The eviction notice still hung on their door. Zoe's medication still needed refilling, and Devon's week-long suspension threatened the one path he'd counted on, education. That night, as he slept on the living room floor to give his mom a break from her back pain, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Officer Barnes. Off the record watch, you're back. Someone's pushing hard on this case. It's not about the watch. The message chilled him. If it wasn't about the watch, what was it really about? 3 days after the crash, Richard Whitfield finally opened his eyes in a private hospital suite. Fluorescent lights and distant voices greeted him. The steady beep of medical monitors brought him back slowly. His throat burned. His chest ached. What happened? He rasped. A nurse stepped forward with a carefully rehearsed explanation. You were in an accident. Your car left the road and caught fire. You're very lucky. Before she could finish, Victoria Chambers entered. Richard's longtime executive assistant, and the only person who truly knew him since his wife's death 5 years earlier. You've got 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and minor burns, she said, her voice both efficient and caring. Richard frowned, trying to recall. The car. It was on fire. Someone pulled me out. He looked between them. Who was it? Victoria and the nurse exchanged glances. Something wasn't being said. Who saved me? Richard asked again, firmer now, his CEO voice returning. Victoria. Finally dismissed the nurse and turned back to him. It was a teenager, a boy who happened to be nearby. He called 911 and stayed with you until help arrived. Her tone was cautious, vague, too vague. After 25 years of running a tech empire, Richard Whitfield knew when someone was keeping the truth from him, and this time, he intended to find out why. Richard Whitfield suspected he wasn't being told the whole truth. But before he could press further, the door opened again. This time, James Reynolds, head of Whitfield Technologies' legal department, and Patricia Winters from Public Relations entered, both wearing expressions of carefully staged concern. Richard, great to see you awake, Reynolds said, taking position at the foot of the bed with the commanding presence that had unsettled courtrooms for years. We need to go over a few things regarding the accident, how we're handling it publicly. What followed was a carefully rehearsed briefing, minimizing press coverage to protect stock prices, ensuring shareholders remained confident, and preserving the illusion that the CEO was fully in control. But something was conspicuously missing, any mention of the person who had saved his life. When Reynolds finally stopped, Richard raised a hand. The simple gesture silenced the room instantly. Before we go any further, he said, Victoria mentioned, someone pulled me from the car. Before it exploded. I want their name. I want to thank them personally. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Patricia spoke, every word chosen with PR precision. There are complications. Upon your arrival at the hospital, your belongings were catalogued. Your Patek Philippe watch was missing. The police are investigating the possibility that the person who helped you may have taken it. The implication hit Richard harder than any of his injuries. That watch, an anniversary gift from his late wife, was irreplaceable. But the suggestion that his rescuer had stolen it felt wrong. Deeply wrong. He remembered fragments. The determined face of a teenager. The strength in the arms pulling him free. The urgency in the voice calling for help. None of it matched this narrative of opportunism. "I want everything," he said flatly. "Name, background, police report, all of it." Victoria hesitated, exchanging a glance with the others. Then she said gently, "Richard, with all due respect, this isn't something you need to worry about during your recovery. Legal and security have it handled. You need to focus on getting well, and on the Westlake development timeline." But Richard Whitfield hadn't built an empire by letting others decide what mattered. He wasn't about to start now. "Victoria, find out who saved me. Today. Everyone else out. I need to rest." The command was final. The room emptied, but Richard didn't sleep. Before he had founded Whitfield Technologies, he'd been a trauma doctor. He knew how people responded under pressure, and whoever had pulled him from that car had acted with selfless urgency. A thief wouldn't have stayed, wouldn't have risked everything for a stranger. Something didn't add up. Hours later, Victoria returned, a tablet in hand, and a grave expression on her face. "His name is Devin Carter," she began. 14 years old. Lives in Oakwood Heights with his mother and younger sister. Honor student at Franklin Douglas High. No criminal record. Not even a disciplinary mark. She handed Richard the tablet. A school photo showed a serious-looking black teenager with thoughtful eyes. The hospital's surveillance footage confirms. He left with nothing in his hands. No watch, no theft, and the timeline rules out any possibility that he took it. Victoria's voice sharpened. "But someone's pushing hard to pin this on him. Police raided his home at night. No consent. No lawyer. Just dragged him in." Richard's jaw clenched. "They're harassing a child who saved my life?" he asked, furious. "Why?" "I've been looking into that," Victoria replied. "Detective Simmons is spearheading the case. He's tied to Westlake Estates security and the hospital board. But more importantly, he has close ties to Thomas. Kelly." A familiar name stirred in Richard's memory. Kelly, Baltimore Sun's distribution manager. Exactly. "And Devin worked for him until the day of your accident. Kelly fired him for leaving his route. The route that passed by your crash site." Richard pieced it together quickly. "So Devin abandoned his route to help me. Kelly fired him for it. And now Simmons connected to Kelly's pushing a bogus investigation." Victoria nodded. "And there's more. According to hospital records, Thomas Kelly was one of the first to arrive at the ER after your admission. Claimed to be a family friend. Was seen near your personal belongings before visitor restrictions were in place. The implications were obvious." Richard swung his legs over the bed, grimacing. "Call my driver. I'm checking out." "Richard, no," Victoria protested. "The doctors said my injuries are stable," he interrupted. "What won't be stable is that boy's life if we let this continue." He pulled on the clothes she had brought in anticipation of his eventual discharge. "I grew up not far from Oakwood Heights," he said, voice low but firm. "If my dad hadn't worked himself into the ground to send me to school, if I hadn't gotten that scholarship, that could have been me, being punished for doing the right thing." Victoria recognized the fire in his eyes. It was the same fire behind every major pivot in the company's history. She said nothing, just began making calls. The residents of Windermere Apartments in Oakwood Heights had seen it all: police raids, broken promises, politicians on photo ops, but a midnight blue Bentley limousine pulling up on a Tuesday afternoon. That was new. Children stopped playing to stare. Mrs. Jackson peeked through her worn curtains. Out stepped a silver-haired white man, leaning on a sleek metal cane. Richard Whitfield. He had insisted on coming alone, no entourage, no security. Just him. "If I show up with an army, it sends the wrong message," he'd told Victoria. He wore jeans, a Baltimore Ravens jacket covering the bandages on his arm, and a baseball cap pulled low. Still, in a neighborhood like this, anonymity was a fantasy. By the time he reached the Carters' third-floor apartment, its step-up-the urine-scented stairwell a painful reminder of his injuries, the building's internal grapevine had already alerted Letitia Carter. She stood at the door in her clinic scrubs, arms crossed, eyes wary. Behind her, Devin peered out, recognition dawning as he saw the man he'd dragged from the burning wreck. "Mrs. Carter," Richard began, extending a hand. "I'm Richard Whitfield. I believe your son saved my life." Letitia didn't shake it. "My son's been through enough because of you," she said flatly. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying." Richard lowered his hand without offense. "You're right to be cautious. I'm not here as the CEO. I'm here as someone who would be dead if not for your son. And I'd like 5 minutes to thank him, properly." Something in his voice sincere, unguarded made Letitia pause. Devin stepped forward. "It's okay, Mom. I want to hear him out." Inside the apartment, Richard took everything in at a glance. Worn, but clean furniture. Walls stained by old leaks, a crooked cabinet door from the police search, bills on the dining table, past due notices, an eviction warning in red ink. But also, a bookshelf full of borrowed library books, certificates for academic excellence. A home, trying desperately to stay upright in a world that kept shaking it. Richard sat carefully, pain radiating from his ribs, and looked at Devin. "You saved my life," he said, "and people tried to destroy yours because of it. That's unacceptable." Devin stared back, unsure how to respond. Richard reached into his coat and slid over a folder legal documents, notarized and ready. A scholarship, full tuition to any school you want, plus mentorship, housing support, and medical coverage for your sister's prescriptions. Letitia looked stunned. "I'm not doing this as charity," Richard added. "You made a decision I hope I'd have made at your age. This isn't a reward. It's an investment. You saved my life. Let me do something to protect yours." Letitia's defenses finally softened. "You're serious?" Richard nodded, completely. Devin exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. Sometimes the system breaks people, but sometimes people break the system right back. A girl, presumably. Devin's sister watched from the doorway of what was clearly the apartment's only bedroom. Her eyes were wide with curiosity, her breathing faintly wheezy even from across the room. "I owe you my life," Richard said once he and Devin were seated, Letitia still standing, poised to escort the visitor out at the slightest misstep. "And instead of being honored for your bravery, you've been met with suspicion, harassment, and what seems like a coordinated attempt to destroy your reputation." The bluntness of his words, devoid of pity, yet rich with understanding, visibly caught both Devin and Letitia off guard. "I've spent the last 24 hours digging into everything that happened after you pulled me from that wreck," Richard continued. "I know Thomas Kelly fired you from your paper route. I know Detective Simmons searched your home without cause. I know your school forced you into a so-called voluntary leave. None of this is acceptable, and all of it ends today." What followed was a clear outline of what Richard had already set in motion. Legal complaints filed against the police department for procedural violations involving a minor. Action taken against Franklin Douglas High for their discriminatory handling of the situation. And a press conference scheduled for the next morning where Richard himself would publicly name Devin as his rescuer and condemn the mistreatment he had endured. As for Thomas Kelly and the missing watch, he added, that's being handled through separate legal channels, delivered with the quiet authority of someone used to altering reality with wealth, resources, and unwavering willpower. The plan left both Devin and Letitia momentarily speechless. It was Zoe who broke the silence, stepping forward with childlike candor. "Are you really a billionaire?" she asked, ignoring her mother's soft warning. Richard smiled warmly. "On paper, yes," he said. "But I grew up in Hampton, just a few miles from here. My dad worked at the steel mill, and 2 other jobs to keep us afloat. I had some ideas, and a lot of help along the way. That small revelation shifted the atmosphere. Letitia's shoulders eased, and she finally sat cautiously on the edge of the sofa. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. It wasn't just a question about his presence in their home. It was about motive, about why someone like him would bother engaging person to person, when he could have let lawyers and PR teams handle it. Richard took a breath before answering. 25 years ago, I was an ER doctor at Johns Hopkins. A 12-year-old black boy was brought in after being hit by a car. We did everything we could, but he didn't make it. His mother arrived too late to say goodbye. He paused, the weight of memory thick in the air. She asked me why her son had to die, when white kids from Roland Park got airlifted for lesser injuries. I didn't have an answer then. I still don't. But when Devin stopped to help me, he triggered a chain of events that showed how much hasn't changed. I can't fix the system overnight, but I can make sure this boy isn't punished for doing the right thing. His words did what no amount of money could. They cracked the armor of distrust around the Carter family. A conversation followed, honest, vulnerable, human. Devin shared his dream of becoming a doctor. Letitia, slowly letting her guard down, described the struggle of managing Zoe's asthma with unreliable insurance. And Zoe, beaming with pride, showed Richard the science project she built from recycled materials, the one that had won her school's science fair. By the time Richard stood to leave, the tension had been replaced by tentative hope. At the door, he reminded them, "My driver will pick you up at 9 a.m. for the press conference if that still works." Letitia nodded, still absorbing the surreal turn their lives had taken. "We'll be ready." As Richard carefully made his way back down the graffiti-covered stairwell, he reflected on the disparity between his world and the Carters. How easily Devin's act of heroism could have been erased by a system designed to protect privilege and punish truth. Outside, neighborhood kids surrounded his limousine, marveling at the sight. Instead of brushing past them, Richard stopped, asking names, answering questions, and leaving behind a neighborhood buzzing with speculation and hope. The morning of the press conference arrived unusually warm, as if mirroring the fragile optimism taking root in the Carter home. Devin, wearing a navy blue suit that had once belonged to his late father, practiced the brief remarks Richard had suggested. Letitia bustled about, double-checking Zoe's inhaler and making sure they had everything they might need. At exactly 9 o'clock, a sleek black SUV, not yesterday's Bentley, pulled up. The driver introduced himself simply as Marcus, no relation to Devin's best friend. As they drove downtown, the landscape changed. Cracked sidewalks gave way to manicured parks and glass towers. Devin stared out the window, absorbing a version of Baltimore he rarely saw. At Whitfield Technologies headquarters, security guided them to a private garage, where Victoria Chambers met them. "Mr. Whitfield would like to speak with you before the press arrives," she explained, leading them down polished corridors to a private conference room. Richard, dressed once again in the impeccable attire of a tech mogul, rose slowly to greet them. The cane by his side and his movements reminded them that he was still healing. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a table set with a modest breakfast. "Before we speak to the public, there's something you need to know." The Carters listened in stunned silence as Richard revealed what had happened overnight. An anonymous call had been made to the company's security office. The message was chilling. "Keep the boy away from the press, or he won't make it home." Simultaneously, Whitfield Technologies' cybersecurity team had detected multiple attempts to hack into Devin's school, and medical records traced back to Thomas Kelly's home. "We've increased security throughout the building," Richard said calmly, "and the threats have given us all the confirmation we needed." The deeper investigation had uncovered a troubling pattern. Kelly had a long history of racial discrimination, routinely assigning Black and Latino paper carriers to the most dangerous neighborhoods. while reserving safe, high-paying routes for white teens. Multiple complaints had been filed over the years, but suppressed thanks to Kelly's relationship with Detective Simmons, whose brother-in-law ran the regional circulation office. The missing watch, Richard said, showing photos on a wall screen. That was never the real issue. Kelly had recognized Devon at the crash site, realized he was on the Westlake Estates route by mistake, and saw an opportunity. The theft accusation was a cover story, meant to discredit Devon and ensure he could never speak out about the discrimination he'd experienced. Security footage and internal hospital logs confirmed the final piece. Thomas Kelly himself had taken the watch. He had accessed Richard's personal effects before security lockdown. Procedures were in place. The truth was now indisputable, and what had begun as a tragic misunderstanding was being revealed for what it really was, a targeted attempt to silence a young black boy who had dared to do the right thing. As the Carters sat in stunned silence, Richard leaned forward, his voice steady. "We can't undo what's been done to you, but we can make sure the world knows the truth and that justice follows. Would you risk your life to save a stranger, knowing it might ruin your own? Would you stand up for what's right, even if the system was built to bury you? Like if you believe truth matters, and share if you believe justice begins with accountability. ... Confusion at the hospital, intending to sell the watch through an associate connected to the black market for luxury goods. But the plan unraveled when hospital security footage captured Kelly near Richard's personal effects. Though this evidence had initially been buried, thanks to Detective Simmons' influence, it had now come to light. "The press conference won't just be about your son's heroism anymore," Richard said, watching their reactions closely. "It will expose the deeper corruption and systemic discrimination that turned his brave act into a nightmare for your family." He paused for a beat before continuing, his tone more solemn. "But I want to be clear, this decision is yours. Going public means exposing your family to intense scrutiny. There will be backlash from people in powerful positions who prefer these injustices stay buried. I can offer protection, but I can't promise this will be easy." Letitia, who had remained quiet through most of the revelations, finally spoke. Her voice was low at first, but it grew stronger with every word. "My whole life, I've taught my kids to keep their heads down, not to stand out. Because the system isn't made for people like us to win," she said, her eyes fixed on Richard. "But what kind of lesson is that? My son risked his life to save yours, and they tried to destroy him, not because of anything he did wrong, but because of who he is, because of where he lives, because of the color of his skin." She sat up straighter, years of quiet survival, giving way to righteous resolve. "If we back down now, what are we telling my daughter? That justice is only for the privileged?" Devon, watching his mother with a pride he didn't try to hide, added his own voice. "This stopped being just about me a while ago. It's about every kid in Oakwood Heights who's been told that trying to do the right thing will just make things worse. Somebody's got to prove that's not always true." Richard nodded, offering no argument, only respect. "Then let's move forward," he said. "But there's one more thing. Thomas Kelly is here. He's in the next room, with his lawyer demanding to speak with me before the press conference. He doesn't know we've already exposed everything. I thought you might want to be in the room for that conversation." The confrontation that followed would remain etched in Devon's memory, a defining moment in his understanding of justice, power, and the quiet strength of moral courage. Thomas Kelly, heavyset, ruddy-faced, all arrogance drained from him, visibly paled as Devon entered the room with his family behind Richard. Whatever plan he'd had to threaten or manipulate Richard into silence collapsed the moment he saw them. What unfolded was a precise and relentless dismantling of Kelly's scheme. "We have the hospital footage showing you near my personal effects," Richard began, calm but unyielding. "We have logs of 12 phone calls between you and Detective Simmons within hours of the accident. We have digital records of your discriminatory route assignments. 6 carriers have come forward with corroborating testimony. As the evidence mounted document after document, statement after statement, Kelly's defense crumbled. His lawyer grew visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, eyes scanning for an exit. Cornered, Kelly tried the last defense of the guilty, minimization. He called it standard practice. Suggested Devon had no business being in Westlake Estates in the first place. It was then that Devon stepped forward. Letitia reached for his arm instinctively, but he gently shook her off. I was exactly where I was supposed to be that morning, he said, voice steady and clear, locking eyes with Kelly. Doing my job, helping someone in need, being the person my parents raised me to be. He took a step closer. The real question is, where were you? Where were you when you decided that the color of my skin made me less worthy of fairness? Where were you when you stole from an injured man and tried to frame a kid to cover up your own racism? His words were not shouted. They didn't need to be. The quiet clarity with which he spoke carried more power than fury ever could. And where do you belong, Mr. Kelly, if not answering for those choices? For the first time, something broke behind Kelly's eyes. His shoulders sagged under the weight of exposure, not just to Richard and the Carters, but to the truth he could no longer deny. Richard, having watched the exchange in silence, stepped in with professional finality. Your resignation has already been accepted by the newspaper's board. They're eager to avoid the lawsuits coming their way. Detective Simmons has been placed on leave. Internal Affairs is already reviewing his conduct. He paused before delivering the final blow. The watch has been recovered from your brother's pawn shop in Dundalk. A stunned silence followed. You have one choice left, Mr. Kelly, Richard said. You can join today's press conference and make a public admission. Or you can remain silent and allow others to explain your actions during criminal proceedings. Kelly said nothing. His silence, in the end, said everything. The press conference that followed wasn't just a corporate event. It was a reckoning. It was a turning point for Devon, for his family, for a city accustomed to injustice being swept quietly away. But this time, someone had spoken, and this time, the world listened. Devon and his family had become more than just the subjects of a news cycle. They had become a catalyst for larger conversations about racial bias, accountability, and the intersection of wealth and justice in Baltimore. At the press conference, Richard Whitfield, standing tall, despite his injuries, delivered a compelling account of Devon's heroism and the mistreatment he had suffered afterward. He stood beside the Carter family and, in a surprising turn, Officer Barnes, who had come forward with damning evidence of internal violations within the police department. Thomas Kelly, choosing public confession over potential jail time, made a halting but complete admission acknowledging both the theft of the watch and his history of racially discriminatory practices. Whether his remorse was genuine remained uncertain, but the most powerful moment belonged to Devon. In a short yet stirring address to the press, his natural eloquence shone through. He didn't focus on personal vindication. He spoke about the need for systemic change. What happened to me happens to black and brown kids across this city every day, kids without billionaires to speak for them or press conferences to clear their names. He said, calm and steady before a wall of cameras. The real question isn't why I was treated unjustly. It's why we tolerate a system where that treatment is routine because of skin color, ZIP code, or family income. The success of today shouldn't be measured by whether justice was done. For me, it should be measured by whether we use this moment to make justice accessible for everyone, not just the privileged. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that day were still unfolding, both for Devon personally and for the city of Baltimore. The Baltimore Police Department, under mounting public pressure after the revelations about Detective Simmons, had launched reforms. These included mandatory bias training and new policies for questioning minors. Simmons himself had been demoted to desk duty, pending ongoing investigations, while Officer Barnes had been promoted to Community Liaison Officer, tasked with rebuilding trust between law enforcement and neighborhoods like Oakwood Heights. Thomas Kelly now faced multiple charges: theft, fraud, and witness intimidation. Legal proceedings were underway, despite his attempts to negotiate a lenient plea. Meanwhile, the newspaper that had once employed him launched an internal audit revealing years of racial bias in delivery route assignments. A class action lawsuit, backed by the testimony of former and current carriers, including Devon, aimed to set new industry standards for fair and equitable treatment. For the Carter family, the changes were deeply personal. Richard Whitfield had indeed offered financial support, but with humility and care. He established a scholarship fund in Devon's name to fully sponsor minority students pursuing medical careers, naming Devon as the first recipient. However, when he offered to move the Carters to a more affluent area, Letitia declined. They didn't want to leave Oakwood Heights behind instead. They relocated to a safer, newly renovated unit within the community, part of a development project Richard had quietly helped fund. The new apartment had proper heating, ventilation, and access to comprehensive health care through a plan arranged by Richard's foundation. Zoe's asthma improved dramatically. Devon returned to school not as a pariah, but as a symbol of resilience. The attention sometimes overwhelmed him, especially when people focused on his courage rather than the systemic issues that had made it necessary. But it deepened his focus. His dream of becoming a doctor now included an interest in law and policy, fueled by everything he had seen. To explore this new passion, he joined a youth advisory board focused on community police relations. His thoughtful contributions quickly earned him respect. He was no longer just a survivor of injustice, but a voice helping shape how systems responded to his generation. Even Richard had undergone a transformation. The billionaire tech CEO, once insulated from Baltimore's harshest realities, had emerged from the experience with a renewed mission to address structural inequality. He used his influence to push for reforms, fund community initiatives, and co-create a mentorship program with Devon, one that linked youth from struggling neighborhoods like Oakwood Heights with professionals from more privileged areas. The program became a model adopted citywide and already drawing national attention. But for Devon, perhaps the most profound change was internal. He no longer saw his circumstances as obstacles to endure. Instead, he saw them as perspectives, lived experience that gave him insight others lacked. That realization crystallized on a pivotal day, when Devon, just 15, addressed the Baltimore City Council during hearings on juvenile justice reform. Systemic change requires more than good intentions or temporary outrage, he told the room, composed and unwavering. It demands sustained commitments, looking at the invisible systems that decide who's given the benefit of the doubt and who has to prove their worth at every turn. My story got attention because it involved a billionaire, but countless stories like mine happen every day, without witnesses, without advocates. True justice means those stories matter, to not because they're exceptional, but because they're common. In the back of the room, Richard watched with quiet pride. He joined in the standing ovation when the council voted unanimously to adopt the reforms, knowing that while his influence opened doors, it was Devon's clarity and conviction that had moved hearts and minds. Later that evening, at a small celebration dinner, Richard shared the news he had been holding on to. The admissions director at Johns Hopkins Medical School called today. He told Devon, "They reviewed your academic record and your essay. They're offering you conditional early acceptance to the class of 2033. Keep up your grades, and the spot is yours." Devon froze, stunned. His dream of becoming a doctor was no longer a vague hope. It was a real, tangible future. Letitia's eyes welled with tears. Zoe clapped her hands, her breathing steady and full of joy. "Does that mean you'll be Dr. Carter someday?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. Devon smiled, still absorbing it all. "Yeah," he said quietly, "just like in my books." Richard leaned in, thoughtful. "You'll make a great doctor, but something tells me, Devon, you might end up changing more than just individual lives." Devon considered it. Everything that had unfolded since the morning, he decided to help a stranger. All the chaos, pain, and growth. And then he nodded. "Maybe that's the real lesson," he said. "Sometimes, saving one life ends up saving many more in ways you never saw coming." As they talked into the night about dreams that once felt impossible, Devon understood something deeper. The systemic challenges his community faced were still real, still urgent, but the story of inevitable defeat had been broken. In its place was something stronger, possibility. The alliance between a black teenager from Oakwood Heights and a white billionaire from Westlake Estates had created something bigger than either of them, a ripple effect, still expanding, still inspiring change.